Hello everybody and welcome to Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. I'm Jack and today I'm here with another deck analysis for you guys. This is going to be on another Worlds deck for you. Kind of a spin on the Darkrai Dragons Garbodor deck that we've been seeing do well in America at US Nationals, things like that. Obviously with the release of Pokemon Ranger, Giratina gets a lot worse, so what we've decided to do is cut back on the Dragons and just go for a full Dark engine really. So yeah, let's jump straight into it, starting with the Pokemon of course. We've got two Darkrai EX, really good attacker. Dark Pulse doing 20 plus 20 more for each Dark Energy on the board on your side. This can do crazy numbers. We are of course running Max Elixirs and we do have access to Baby Yveltal as well, so we can get a lot of energy relatively quickly onto the board, meaning that Dark Pulse can be doing pretty insane numbers. It can do enough to knock out the X's, it's not unheard of at all. And yeah, really nice attack. Dark Head, we also do have access to Dark Head, but it's very rarely going to be doing more damage than Dark Pulse, but every now and again when it is, you do have access to Dark Head, so there is that option as well. A couple of things to note, obviously 2 Retreat is a bit painful, but having 180 HP means that Night Marchers with 6 Night Marchers in the discard and a Fighting Fury Belt still don't knock you out. They do need not 6 Night Marchers, 8 Night Marchers. They do need all 9 in there to be able to knock you out. And Pumpkaboo needs an extra one because you are psychic resistant, meaning that more often than not, when you start with Darkrai, they're going to start going more aggressive with Joltik, and that's this deck really likes Night March players that use Joltik aggressively, because there's a couple of really nice plays that you can make against Joltiks that really help you in the Night March matchup. But yeah, starting off with 2 Darkrai, really good attacker, and I really like this guy. Moving on, we've got 2 Yveltal from XY. Obviously this guy's been seen in a lot of anti-Night March decks, and he does very similar here. Oblivion Wing knocks out any Night Marcher without a Fighting Fury Belt for 1 energy, which is really good, and recovers energy itself, which is even nicer. Also, just in general, even when it's not knocking out a Night Marcher or knocking something out, being able to get more energy onto the board that you've maybe had to discard with Ultra Balls or Professor Sycamores, things like that, really useful. So yeah, this guy is still as useful as ever, still one of the best Dark Pokemon we've got around at the moment. Do have access to Darkness Blade, but more often than not, you're probably just going to be using him for an early Oblivion Wing or 2, and then focusing more on the Darkrai. Also running 2 Yveltal from Breakpoint. Fortunately, I don't own any of this guy, which is something I need to change, because this guy I think is just getting better and better. There are a couple of really sneaky plays you can make with this guy. We do have access to Pitch Black Spear. You can be doing the double 60s, which is nice in every now and again. It's not what it's in here for. It's not always what it's in here for. It can be nice in certain situations, but the Fright Night ability is really key in certain matchups. Again, really helpful in Night March. A couple of combos, or one specific combo I'll be able to show you later on. But also helps with things like Vespivile. If you can Lysander up their Vileplume whilst you've got your Yveltal in the active, kind of means that they can't really get out of the active without wasting 2 DCEs. Or is it 2 DCs or 1 DC? At least wasting energy is the point I'm making, which means that that's energy that they're not using for Vespiquen, and therefore that's energy they're not using for attackers. And if they run out of energy, then the Vestivale player more often than not loses, just because they've gone through so much of their deck turn 1 to try and secure the win. If they can't quite do that, then you're in a really good spot. Yeah. So obviously there's a couple of Night March combos that like I say, one specific combo that I'll show you when we get to it in a little bit. But yeah, Yveltal from Breakpoint I think is another really versatile card that really helps with certain situations and certain matchups. Also running 1 Yveltal EX. Obviously you do not want to see this guy at all in the Night March matchup, but if you do, it's not the end of the world. It's really painful, but you can still win games where you've had to start Yveltal. But yeah, you don't want to be looking for this guy in the Night March matchup. But other than that, I don't think there's going to be too much Manectric around, in all fairness. So I think this guy's a pretty safe one of. And yeah, it just kind of acts as a third EX attacker. We could have a third Darkrai, but I think this guy gives a lot more versatility. It prevents your opponent from building too big of a board or too big of a Pokemon, because you can drop this guy down and theoretically power him up into 1 turn with Max Elixirs. So yeah, it prevents your opponent from doing that. Also, kind of can always sit as a bench sitter, can preserve energy as well. I think this guy's just kind of, I think it's nicer than a third Darkrai. So also sort of helps with different weaknesses as well. So you're not always weak to the same thing. But yeah, there's nothing too much to say about Yveltal EX other than it's just as good as it pretty much ever has been. Dark is just a really, really good type at the moment. Got one Seismitoad EX just for kind of disruption and stall, things like that. Again, another really, really clutch Night March card. If you can Quaking Punch them early, it can really, really make them struggle sometimes. Other than that, it's just a really, really good disruption card. Obviously, it gets a little bit worse with Ranger, meaning that people can get around the item lock. But if they're getting around item lock using Ranger early, it means they're not using another supporter that may be more useful to them early. So it's not the end of the world if that is the case. Obviously, in general, just a really, really good disruption card. We all know what Seismitoad does. It's been in format for a very long time now, so really, really useful card. Then, of course, got a 2/2 Garbodor. Garbodor is just kind of a good check for a lot of different decks, things like Greninja and stuff that rely on abilities, but also Garbodor is really good for as a check for kind of rogue decks and decks that may try and counter the meta really well, kind of rely on abilities and stuff like that. Garbodor just puts all of them in check. Really, really nice sort of card to have. The deck doesn't rely on abilities at all, really. When you've got Pitch Black Spear, you're not going to have a tool attached, but not Pitch Black Spear, Fright Knight. But there's only a few key situations where you're going to need Fright Knight over Garbodor. So yeah, you'll know when you need your abilities and when you don't. Other than that, as you can see, the only other ability cards are Shaman, and more often than not, you're going to be playing these guys turn 1 or not at all. So you're very rarely going to be disrupting yourself. So yeah, Garbodor is just a really, really good check for anything that's kind of anti-meta that's trying to deal with a lot of things at once by countering all abilities that it sees. And other than that, it really annoys ability-focused decks like Greninja and stuff like that you're probably going to see at Worlds, just because of how consistent and how strong they are in a meta like this. And then finally, we do of course have 2 Shaman. Obviously a really, really good setup card. We all know kind of what that does. The only key play that I think needs pointing out is against Night March. Being able to, ideally you want to be starting with Darkrai. If you're starting Darkrai, your opponent is more likely to go into Joltix. If they go into Joltix, the ideal play that you've got, or a couple of nice plays you've got, obviously you want to try and win the prize trade, so you want to try and get these Shamans off your board. You want to be Sky returning into Joltix. You're either knocking them out if they haven't got a Fury Belt, or if they've got a Fury Belt, this is the guy that you go into, because it obviously Fright Knight shuts off all effects of tools, meaning that you've taken the Shaman off the board, it's now in your hand. Also, the Joltik no longer has 70 HP, goes back down to 30. You've done 30 with the Shaman, meaning that you still take a prize. So basically, if you can get them to be going into Joltix, and you have access to these two guys, there's a couple of really, really nice plays, and there's a couple of good plays that you can play against that you can make against other decks like that as well. But I think the key one is being able to knock out Night Marchers or knock out Joltix, even if they have Fighting Fury Belts on, because more often than not, they'd rather... it's a lot of commitment to kill a Darkrai, with, especially if it's got a Fighting Fury Belt on, with a Pump Kaboo, so therefore they kind of have to go into Joltik just to be able to keep up with you, and therefore you can still knock out their Joltiks at the same pace that they're taking prizes as well. So it helps you really win the prize, or at least balance the prize race, and eventually win the prize race, which is really, really nice. So yeah, that's a really, really nice little play that you can make against Night March. Probably one of the... they're the kind of plays that I think you need to be making to be able to win the Night March consistently. But I think with that and the Seismitoad and a couple of other things, you know, I think the deck has a relatively favourable Night March matchup. It's not fantastic, but it's not awful. It's as good as it can be for a Night March game. I don't think there's much more we could do with the deck to be able to change it too much or improve it too much. Going into the trainers, We're starting with 4 Sycamore. Again, as I've said in the past couple of videos, Professor Sycamore is just super consistent. It's going to be the best supporter we have, probably leading into the Sun and Moon format. So, yeah, still get used to this guy. We've got 2N, obviously a really good comeback card. The deck is quite fast, but it's not super fast. It can sometimes go down on prizes against things like Night March, against things like Vespiquen that can get set up really quickly. So this is a good comeback card. Also, a really good hand refresh early in the game, and a lot of the damage from this deck, as you can see from Darkrai, is on the board, so it doesn't really matter if you're even disrupting yourself. If you're both sort of down to 2 or 1 prize, even if you're disrupting yourself, more often than not your damage is on the board rather than coming from your hand. So it's very often not really disruptive to you and more disruptive to your opponent anyway, so N is a really nice card, and obviously the hand refresh is always useful. 2 Lysander, being able to get around things like, well, basically Trevenant is one of the most important things. Trevenant can, whilst it is weak to pretty much this whole deck, it can still be annoying, especially if they Trevenant before you can get an item onto Garbodor. This is kind of a way around that. Obviously Lysander itself is a really useful card. Being able to Lysander up Vileplumes and then use the little trick with Yveltal as well is really nice. Just having access to Lysander I think is really useful in a deck that can theoretically take knockouts on anything. There's a lot of, as long as the damage is on the board, you can kind of pick and choose where you want to take your knockouts, and therefore having 2 Lysander rather than 1 is really useful, especially against in a format where things like Trevenant are going to be really big, because if you can't get into your energy in the first place, then you're never really going to be able to succeed against Trevenant, so therefore you still want to be able to find Lysander turn 1 or whatever if you really need to, if they can manage to pull off the turn Mawali or anything like that. Got 1 Pokemon Ranger from Steam Siege. Again, just kind of a utility card. We know Seismitoad to an extent is likely to be big. We know there's obviously things that can be rangered, such as things like Jolteon EX, things like that. There's no evolutions in the deck, so Jolteon can just shut down the deck, so being able to ranger around that is important. But just having 1, again, for the utility is really nice. Something that isn't included in here is a Ninja Boy. So if you don't think there's the specific uses for Ranger, I think me and Joe kind of toyed around with the idea of a Ninja Boy instead. I think we went with Ranger just for... Ninja Boy is more of a combo card. This is more of a consistency, kind of covering all the matchups card. If you want to go for a more combo based deck, or more sort of aggressive deck, you probably could fit a Ninja Boy in here. But yeah, Ninja Boy is absent from our list. But yeah, that's why Ranger is in here, to be able to deal with things such as Jolteon that kind of just sort of shut the deck down, because they're not, like, Jolteon isn't an ability, so Garbodor doesn't shut it down, so they can just continually run through us if we don't have a way of being able to shut this off. So yeah, definitely important to have 1, I think. Finally, we've got an AZ. Against Night March loves taking prize on EXs, so even if you can't get into your DCEs to be able to get rid of your Shaymins, and to an extent your Yveltal as well, AZ is really important for being able to pick these guys up. Also, being able to AZ just for another few cards from setup is a relatively good play every now and again. Being able to get something out of the active as well. Everything in here kind of has a chunky retreat cost, and whilst we are playing Floatstones for the Garbodor, sometimes we won't have access to them. Obviously, Floatstone doesn't work with Yveltal, things like that, so I think it is important to have another switching card in here. We do have an Escape Rope, which I'll get to in a minute as well, but under item lock, I think it's still important to have some type of switching card. Onto the items, we've got 4 VS Seeker, of course, I don't really feel it needs much explaining, and 4 Ultra Ball, kind of to the same effect. Searches out everything in the deck, gets energy in the discard for Yveltal, declumps the hand, things like that, you know. Just the normal things that Ultra Ball indeed does. For Max Elixir, again, this is the combo-y part of the deck, not the combo-y part of the deck, but this is more of a combo-y card of the deck, being able to get a lot of energy, flood the board really early with energy, We are running a very high energy count, so more often than not Max Elixir will be hitting targets. It means that you can get a lot of energy on the board early with Darkrai, meaning that sometimes you can completely negate the use of Yveltal. You can just go straight for Darkrai, which is really nice, especially in a format which is pretty non-EX actually, so it means that you don't need a huge amount of energy, meaning that sometimes you can just kind of forget about Yveltal and have enough energy to go straight with Darkrai anyway. But being able to throw your energy anywhere is also really nice as per. You want to get these out as early as possible, just so you're not worrying about things like Trevenant or Vileplume or any other item lock that may come your way. But yeah, as soon as you can get into these Max Elixirs, you are hopefully going to be hitting a lot of targets, considering there's quite a large energy count in the deck. So yeah, just kind of speeds up the deck. A really nice card, and can really flood the board early with a lot of pressure, really. Got 3 Trainer's Mail. Just a consistency card. Obviously, we want to be able to find these Max Elixirs early, a lot of the different cards early, to try and get as much use from them as possible. It means that we can. It's just like another 3 search cards as well. It's not always search, but we have quite a few trainers in the deck. This deck's got a higher than normal energy count, so they're not as useful. So that's why we've only got 3. But if you still feel you need a 4th, there probably is space for a 4th in here somewhere. Just for added consistency. There's no key things here, just being able to consistently find your trainers is really important. We've got 1 Escape Rope. Escape Rope, again, getting you out of things like Jolteon lock. Obviously you can't use this guy against Trevenant, but that's why we've got the 2 Lysander in here. And just getting yourself out of any other kind of awkward things that you don't want to be dealing with. There may be a case to say that you don't need 2 Lysander and 1 Escape Rope, but I think you're probably more likely to take out a Lysander before an Escape Rope, just so you still have access to switching, especially with the fact that you've got Float Stones in the deck anyway. It kind of means that you can use Escape Rope as a free retreat into anything, which is really nice. But yeah, being able to get out of things like Jolteon lock and stuff is really important for the deck, given that there's no evolutions in the deck and no way other than Ranger to be able to deal with Jolteon. So it kind of means we've got Ranger to deal with Jolteon, but we also have the access to Escape Rope plus Lysander to be able to take out a Jolteon that's giving us a bit of a headache anyway. We've got 1 Super Rod, again just for being able to get your Pokemon back. Sometimes we have to throw away things early, which is really annoying. Also being able to get Shamans back into the deck, so they can't be target whistled, things like that. In against Night March, all of these little plays that are specific for certain matchups, but other than that, just being able to get your Pokemon that you need back in for that matchup. Obviously, we've only got 2 Darkrai and 1 Yveltal as big attackers, so sometimes it is required that you need access to a bit more, especially if one of the 3 big attackers is prized. So we do have access to it. Obviously, you can get energy back as well, which can be useful if you've had to throw it away before you've been able to Max Elixir, but more often than not you're going to be getting energy back through the use of Yveltal. So Super Rod is more often going to be getting Pokemon back. Though that being said, having the ability to be able to get energy back into the deck is really useful, especially if you're just looking for 1 or 2 more attachments per turn, right at the end of the game with Max Elixir. Onto the tools, we've got 3 Floatstone, obviously. Make sure Garbodor is online, but also means that if you start with something that you don't really want to start with, you are able to move it. Obviously it doesn't work with Yveltal unless you have Garbodor out, then it actually does. But yeah, there's a couple of things to bear in mind like that you can't attach your Floatstone to Yveltal because it doesn't really work, or it doesn't work at all. But other than that, yeah, it's just kind of being able to move things that you need to move as and when you need to. Obviously, it's the ideal tool for Garbodor as well, considering Fighting Fury Belt doesn't do anything for Garbodor other than initiate Garbotoxin. So that's why we're running 3 Floatstone, just so we have access to these as early as possible. Also means that we can get into them relatively quickly. So things like Trevenant or any other sort of ability-based decks don't give us too much of a headache for too long in the day, because there's not too much what's the tool disruption out at the moment. We've got Megaphone and we've got Xerosic, but a lot of decks have kind of cut Megaphone, and Xerosic is being seen here and there, but we've got a lot of targets for Xerosic. So if they're using Xerosic on float stones, they're not using it on Fury Belts or DCEs. So kind of if they're not using it on one, we're getting the benefit out of the other anyway. So it's really useful to have access to these float stones really early, just to kind of set up Garbodor as quickly as possible, because it's such a win condition really. Finally, we've got 3 Fury Belt. A Fury Belted Darkrai EX can't actually be knocked out by a Pumpkaboo with as many Night Marches in the discard as possible, which is a very, very useful thing to know. If they only have Pumpkaboos, if you can set up a Darkrai with a Fury Belt, I'm 99% sure, I can't think of anything that they can do to knock you out without finding a way of getting rid of the Fury Belt or whatever. So that's a useful thing to know. But other than that, it's an extra 40 HP, an extra 10 damage. A lot of Pokemon at the moment have odd damage rather than even, or odd HP rather than even HP, or kind of it's always even, but you know what I mean. And since Yveltal and Darkrai are always doing something in the 20s, this kind of pushes it up to the going into 30, 50, that kind of range, meaning that you're not always relying on having an extra energy. So yeah, it just gives you a little bit more versatility, and the plus 40 HP is so good in so many matchups. It means that you can really sort of push for as much value out of your Pokemon as you can, and it makes things really hard to knock out. Like a Seismitoad with a Fury Belt under item lock, it's really difficult to one-shot a Seismitoad with a Fury Belt, even with a deck like Night March or something. They have to commit so much. So Fury Belt is probably one of the biggest cards in the deck, just to be able to increase your survivability really well. Finally, onto the energy, we have 10 Dark, just so we have a lot of targets for Max Elixir, and we do have access with Baby Yveltal. You could perhaps cut it to 9, but I wouldn't want to go any lower than 9. I don't think I'd want to go any higher than 11. And then we're also running 3 DCEs. You could sort of flip-flop one of these into an 11th energy, but I think 3 DCEs is right, because there's a lot of attackers that use DCE. Pretty much all of our attackers can use DCE to kind of speed up the process, so having access to them is really important. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with this energy count anyway. It means you have a lot of Dark to be able to hit Max Elixirs and still get value out of Yveltal or Baby Yveltal. You have a lot of energy to be able to hit a high count with Darkrai, do a lot of damage with Darkrai. Like I say, I think there's going to be very little presence from Megas at Worlds, so you're very rarely going to need to hit Mega numbers. So therefore, you can quite easily hit EX numbers, things like that, with this amount of energy. So yeah, I think the energy count is pretty solid, and it's just useful having a large amount of energy to rely on. You always know you're going to get pretty much for certain the turn 1 attachment, maybe 1 or 2 extra energy with Max Elixir or Yveltal, such as sort of 2 or 3 extra attachments in a turn, which is really big. But yeah, that's the list. I think sort of theorizing with this deck has probably been the deck that I've enjoyed theorizing and kind of playing test hands with the most. I think this is a really consistent build. I think it does what it's meant to really consistently. Obviously, like lots of high counts, 4, 4, 4, 3 of the tools. There's very little one-offs, only 4 one-offs in the deck, which is really good, I guess, not including the Pokemon. But yeah, it kind of means that the deck is super consistent, and I think that's a really key point for Worlds. Having a consistent list is really useful, and I think this is definitely a really good base list for you guys to try out. Maybe there's some changes you'd make. If there are indeed, let us know in the comments. We love to hear your guys. I want some feedback about what you would change about the lists. But yeah, I'm really enjoying this deck at the moment, and I think in all fairness, this is probably one of the top considerations for me for Worlds, just because of how consistent it is, how good it is at dealing damage. But yeah, I don't think there's much else to say, so thank you very, very much for watching. I've been Jack from Omnipoke. Make sure you stick around on the channel. We've got deck analyses coming for the next few days. We've got a lot of decks sort of going around, thinking about a lot of decks, and then obviously Worlds isn't too long now, so thank you very much for watching. Make sure you stay tuned to Omnipoke. I've been Jack, and I look forward to seeing you in another video.